So I've been playing quite a lot with like the sixth diminished scale of chords ideas lately, and I found it's not super hard to incorporate into like my chord melody solo guitar type stuff. Just because there's like no constraints on time, I can kind of do what I want to. It's easier to sort of use those ideas, and I found it to be a lot more difficult. To do that with comping, in part because like I'm much more constrained in terms of like how much time I have to play certain things and do certain things. You don't want to play as much, right? Like you want to leave a lot more space. And then just old dog new tricks. I use a lot of these like rootless shell Ed Bickert kind of things. It's hard to get away from that stuff, just is what it is. Something that I found interesting in the Thomas Eccles book was just the idea that me working on intervals that are sort of component parts of the voicings you're using, can make them a little more practical. Like we think of being like thirds and sixths as being like really useful intervals for like dyads and that sort of thing. But with the voicings that I play, those thirds and sevenths in those rootless shells always end up being fourths and fifths on the middle strings. So using the sixth diminished scales, the scale of chords, and playing them through in dyads, but using what are scalar fifths that end up being, sort of looking at them in isolation, they end up being fourths, tritones, perfect fourths, tritones, perfect fifths, just depending on whether or not they cross that added note. They can sometimes collapse and look a little smaller. But playing the scale through in fifths has been kind of useful. So that would look like this. If I'm playing a 2-5-1 in C or whatever, I've got my C6 diminished scale. So sound like this. That's on those middle two strings. I can do the same thing with like if I'm playing G7, let's say D minor 6, and I can do that too, and it would sound like this. So pretty useful stuff. I found that when I'm playing, if I'm playing a 2-5-1, that might sound something like this most of the time. I can get a little bit of movement with like just using those fourths. So it's sort of like having a melody note, but it sounds something like this. So just like those little bits of movement there that have been like kind of useful. So they're still pretty rough, like obviously. But I think that might be like where something interesting kind of sits. So we'll see about that. Anyway.